Hi, everyone. Welcome to Teaching Reading with Confidence. My name is Malia Hollowell. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher and the founder of Plato to Plato and the Reading Roadmap, and I am so excited that you're here. This is actually the second night this week that we've done this webinar, and we always get excited to get all of the feedback from all of you. So many people wrote in to tell us how much they learned and how much they appreciate the hour that we spent together. So I'm hopeful that you will have the same experience. Before we jump in though, I always love to get to know all of you. So I would love it if you could click on the comment box and let us know where you're tuning in from. It's fun to see all the different locations and that we have. Sometimes we're even able to hit every single continent except for Antarctica. So we can cross our fingers and see if we can do that tonight. While you're doing that, I also want to let anybody who's been affected by Hurricane Florence know that our thoughts and prayers are with you and your families, and we are sending you lots of love. So please just know that you're in our thoughts. So let's go ahead and see where you all are tuning in from. We have Amber from Texas and Julie from British Columbia. We have Val from Pennsylvania and Stephanie from, oh gosh, Stephanie, it went by too fast. I think it was from Wisconsin, but I may be wrong. Beth from Arizona. We have Mary Jane and Kat from Hawaii, Gina from Florida, Nikki from Iowa, Mary from Pennsylvania. You guys, we might have all the states. I'm not sure if we'll hit all the continents right now, but we might have gotten all the states. So, okay, a couple of administrative things for all of you. First, I wanted to let you know that we have put together a webinar workbook to help you keep track of everything that we're going to be covering. Now, we had a snafu, and unfortunately we discovered this in our last webinar, so I did change the links, the download links. If you've signed up since Sunday, you have the correct webinar workbook, but if you signed up before Sunday, then there is a typo on here, two typos actually. On the first page, it says phonemic awareness, and you can just cross it off and write phonological. And then on the next line, it says 5 major phonemic awareness skills are, and you can cross that off and write phonological too. Now, if you are like me, I'm very type A, and I do not like red marks on my papers before I've actually jumped in and started a workshop. So if you would like to download the correct revised version of the workbook, Kimberly, our awesome community manager, is sharing the link with you right now. So you can look in the comment box and just click on that link that she posted, and you can print off the second page, and then you will be good to go. So I'm going to give you guys just a second to grab that in case you want it. And while you are doing that, I am curious to know what grade you teach. So I'm going to go ahead and post our first poll for tonight. If you can just click on whether you teach pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, first grade, or second grade, it is helpful to know who we have tuning in just so that we can make sure that we're answering all of your questions. So it looks like kindergarten pulled ahead. We have 50% kindergarten right now. First grade's hovering around 16%. We have 31% pre-kindergarten, and second grade is 6%. So welcome, you guys. We are so glad to have you here. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about myself before we actually start the official webinar. I started teaching 15 years ago, which is crazy for me to think about because it seems like it was just yesterday. But when I stepped into the classroom for the first time, the subject that overwhelmed me the most was reading, because I knew that in order for my kids, my students, to succeed the next year and really hit the ground running, my number one job was to make sure that they got all of the reading skills that they needed to do that successfully. And so the task seemed really daunting and overwhelming, and I was pretty overwhelmed. So now, fast forward 15 years, I've done a ton of research. Reading has become my very favorite subject to teach. And so I do this webinar every couple of months because I am hopeful that you all can feel that excitement and enthusiasm and confidence about teaching reading that I feel now, because it really is magical to see kids have those aha moments. So that is my wish for you, and we're going to spend the next hour geeking out on teaching reading so that you can step into the classroom tomorrow feeling even more empowered than you do right now. Okay, let's go ahead. Oh, one more administrative thing. I mentioned it briefly, but we do have one of my favorite people on the planet joining us, Kimberly. Hi, Kimberly. She is our awesome community manager, and she does a lot of things, but tonight she is going to be helping with the chat box. So as we go along tonight, if you have any questions, she will be answering them. Now, the way our system works, when she answers a question, it's actually going to pop up as though it'll say my name next to it, which is kind of weird because obviously I can't talk to you at the same time as I'm typing on the computer. That would be pretty impressive. But just know if it says Malia Hollowell, it is actually Kimberly, and she is stepping in for me since I can't do that right now. She will be marking all of her responses with an A. So that is the clue. A for answer. You'll see a little circle right next to her response, and you'll know that that is the answer to your question. Okay, are you guys ready? I'm excited. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and jump over. Okay, let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, as I told you, we have an action-packed hour in store for you. And so I want to start by giving you a good look at everything that we're going to be covering. So first, I'm going to break down the 4 signs that kids are ready to read. Knowing what to look for will make it so much easier for your kids to start reading because you will be able to easily identify whether or not they're actually ready to launch into the formal reading process. And you'll be able to know if you need to take a step back and slow things down so that you can continue building up their foundation. Next, we're going to move on to the 5-step plan for differentiating reading instruction. This simple system works in classrooms of all sizes and grade levels, so I promise it's going to be a real game changer no matter what grade you teach. Next, I'm going to help you save time by showing you what skills you need to assess with new readers and what you need to look at with more advanced readers. I'm even going to let you in on a common misconception about assessing reading comprehension. It'll take some serious pressure off of you and your students. And then I'm going to break down my favorite tips for creating effective centers. I'm going to show you the 6 workstations that I set up, and I'm going to teach you my step-by-step for organizing students into effective work groups. And then at the very end, I'm going to answer any questions that you all have, and I'm going to tell you how to access all of the freebies that I'm going to be showing you over the next hour. So hang on to the very end to find that. The next hour is going to be packed, but obviously there's only so much that we can cover in 60 minutes. If you want to dive deeper and get a step-by-step roadmap for teaching kids how to read, be sure to stick around until the very end. I just opened up enrollment for my 4-week course called The Reading Roadmap, and it gives you the step-by-step roadmap for teaching every child to read without living at school or crying in the bathroom, because I've done that. My favorite part is that it also includes hundreds of time-saving printables. There is a set of 90 days of done-for-you lesson plans, plus live coaching sessions with me so that we can take all of the guesswork out of your teaching. So I'm going to be giving you all of the details at the end. But for now, let's go ahead and jump in, and we'll start breaking down the 4 signs that kids are ready to read. As I mentioned before, having this list handy will make it so much easier to figure out when students are ready to dive in and start learning how to put letter sounds together to actually read words. To start, we're going to take a big picture 30,000-foot view of the 4 signs before we break down each one. So sign number 1 is motivation. And let me tell you, this one is up at the top for a reason. It can really make or break a child's experience and your teaching experience too. Next, we're going to look at print awareness, which is just a fancy way of saying that kids need to know the basics of how to read. Children should be able to point to the cover of a book. They should show you how to turn a page when you finish reading the words. They should be able to hold the book so that it faces the correct direction. Students should also understand that readers sound out words on a page by looking at letters, thinking about what sounds they make, and then putting those sounds together to make words. Children do not need to be able to actually sound out the word on their own, but they should grasp the concept at this point. So when I talk about letter recognition, which is lucky number 3 on our list, Know that what we're talking about here is just having children name some of the letters that they see. For instance, if they saw the letter B in a book, they might say, hey, that's a B. Or if they were driving down the road and they saw the M for McDonald's, they'd say, look, there's an M. This skill is actually one of the most controversial in the early childhood education world. And I'm going to tell you why, and I'm also going to tell you what my solution to the controversy a little bit later. So hang on for that. And then last but not least, there is phonological awareness, which is just a fancy way of saying that children need to be able to hear the sounds in words, and they need to be able to move those sounds around to make a new word. For example, if we were checking on children's phonological awareness, we might ask, do the words cat and dog rhyme? What is the first sound in the word rabbit? Or we might even ask, how many syllables do you hear when you clap out the word rodeo? Rodeo. So you hear 3, that would be our phonological awareness. So now that we've taken a big picture view of the 4 signs, I want us to take a closer look at each one and start talking about some simple ways that we can build the skills in our classrooms. Motivation is up first. For many kids, building motivation means that they need to actually build confidence. Even as adults, we're not always excited to try something new if we think that we're going to fail miserably at it. Imagine if I invited you to race against the Olympic sprinting gold medalist, or I suggested that you play against the world champion chess master. Doesn't sound like a very fun Sunday, does it? Many students feel the exact same way about reading. They think that they don't have a shot in the dark at being good at it, so they can't imagine putting in even an ounce more effort. Thankfully, there are some really simple ways that we can build students' motivation if they don't have it yet. This first tip takes absolutely 0 prep time. There are not many teacher hacks that can promise that, right? Rather than calling students by their actual names, start calling them readers instead. For instance, if you were lining up at lunch, for lunch, you might say, first grade readers, please line up at the door for lunch. Or you might say, readers, it's time to put our books away and get ready for recess. Or if you were working one-on-one with a child, you might say, wow, you are such an amazing reader. You gathered so many clues about what the story might be about when you looked at that picture. Just like a meditation CD repeats the same mantra over and over again, by calling your students readers every chance you get, you will help them internalize it and start believing in themselves too. Building confidence will naturally grow their motivation. Now, this is the first freebie that I'm going to be passing along to you. Another really easy way to boost kids' motivation is by mixing it up and making reading fun. So I'm going to be passing along this fun reading bingo sheet so that you can make copies for your class. To play, students are just going to pick one of the challenges to complete, and they'll cross off the box when they're through. So once they've crossed off all 25 challenges, they will have a bingo blackout and they will win the game. The sheet has tons of fun ideas. There's read a recipe and make it, read under a bed, read in the closet with a flashlight. The list of fun goes on and on. All of the ideas are creative and playful ways to make reading novel and build students' motivation. So it's a really great way for a really great sheet to send home with children to complete with their families. Moving on to sign number 2 that students are ready to read is print awareness, which means knowing how to read a book. And to teach it, I love to use a strategy that's called thinking out loud. Can you just let me know, have you guys done that before? Have you tried thinking out loud before? To think out loud, I picked just 1 or 2 skills to focus on. It might be reading left to right across the page, or maybe it's knowing the difference between a letter and a word. Then I introduce a read aloud book to the class, and I explain that as I read, I'm going to be thinking out loud so that they can hear what's happening in my brain as I go along. And then that is exactly what I do. As we read through the book, I think out loud and I show the kids how I am applying our focus skill while I read. So for example, if we were working on pointing underneath each word, I would talk about how my finger was moving along with the words as I read them. As another example, if we're talking about using picture clues to figure out what's happening, I would tell the kids what I think the story might be about when I was looking at the illustrations. Thinking out loud is a really simple and incredibly effective way to build print awareness because students hear the step-by-step of what goes on in a strong reader's brain, and then they're able to apply it in their own reading as well. So Mary said, always thinking out loud. Carissa said, yes, thank you. Heather said, yes. And Shelby said, yes, I have. Awesome. Rose said, yes. Margaret said, opening a window into a reader's mind. Margaret, I love that. That is just a brilliant metaphor. I love it. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our third sign that kids are ready to read, which is recognizing alphabet letters. Now, to most of us, that probably sounds pretty clear-cut and drama-free, right? But put on your seatbelts, friends. We are about to hit a little turbulence. There is actually huge debate about whether to teach upper or lowercase letters first, and whether to teach letter names or letter sounds first. And as you may have already noticed, many people feel very strongly about their opinions. In fact, on our Play-Doh to Play-Doh Facebook page, we always know that if we ever ask for people to weigh in on whether they teach upper or lowercase letters in the classroom first, we are going to spark a very heated conversation. So it's definitely a hot button for a lot of teachers. Carolyn, one of our Play-Doh to Play-Doh readers, wrote in to say, many of my kindergartners come to my class not knowing their alphabet letters and sounds. I currently start by teaching one letter and its sound per week, but this means that it isn't until around January that we're able to start sounding out CVC words. Is there a better way or a faster way to get students sounding out words? Also, I was taught to begin with teaching the alphabet letters by starting with consonants that have one sound and leaving the vowels, which would be A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, until last, as they are the most challenging. What order do you suggest teaching alphabet sounds? Well, Carolyn, my solution is to teach both at the same time. I actually use a brain-charging alphabet chant to teach kids. Every day we learn 4 new letter names and sounds. We start with the letter A and then we move along in alphabetical order. So I teach my class the name of the letter, the sound that it makes, and a word that starts with that sound. Let me give you an example. So using this alphabet chant, I would have cards, visual cards that show the upper and lowercase letter, and also a picture of a word that starts with that letter. So for instance, we would say, A is for apple, A, A, A. B is for baby, B, B, B. Each of the letters has a little action movement that we do as we say the words. So the chant is combining movement, the visual reminder of the card, and then also the sound. So kids' brains are making tons of connections and they're able to learn the letters really quickly. Now, that is to say, students still need plenty of practice to apply it in their reading, that's a given, but it gives them a major power launch because they are learning the upper and the lowercase version of each letter. They're learning the letter name and the letter sound all at the same time. Last but certainly not least, I can't say that word tonight. Last but certainly not least on our list of skills kids need before they're ready to read is phonological awareness. If you're scratching your head and secretly thinking to yourself that you still don't quite understand what phonological awareness actually means, don't worry, you are not alone, but I have a trick. When you are on the phone, you hear someone talking to you, right? Well, let's apply that to our tricky vocabulary term. We're going to break the word phonological awareness into 2 parts. Phon, which is pretty close to phone, a logical, and then awareness. So phonological awareness starts with the sound phone. So that reminds us that it has to do with hearing, just like you hear on the telephone. Phonological awareness means hearing parts of words and moving them around. And there are actually 5 major phonological awareness skills. Rhyming is probably the first one that pops into your mind. Rhyming means words that end with the same sound. So for instance, cat, bat, and sat all rhyme. And the words hip, sip, and dip rhyme. The next one in the list is segmenting sentences. Segmenting just means breaking into parts. So for this skill, kids need to break a sentence into words. For instance, if I said, the car is blue, a child would tell me that there are 4 parts to that sentence. The car is blue. That is segmenting sentences into 4 words. Isolating phonemes means hearing the individual sounds in words. So for this skill, I might ask a child to tell me the first sound in the word dog, which would be d, or I might ask her to name the middle sound in the word cap, which is a. So let's try one for practice. What is the first sound in the word bug? B. Good job. Okay, let's go ahead and say the next sound or the first sound in the word shell. Sh. So even though the word shell has 2 letters in that first sound, it's those 2 letters, S and H, are making just one sound. So if we were asking a child to name the first sound in the word, they would name the sound sh. Now, similar to segmenting sentences from just a moment ago, syllable segmenting means breaking something into pieces. But this time, instead of breaking up a sentence, kids are going to be breaking apart a word. The word elephant, for example, has 3 parts. L-a-phant. Now let's try one on our own. So how many syllables does the word helicopter have? Hel-i-cop-ter. So helicopter has 4 syllables. Finally, the last phonological awareness skill, major phonological awareness skill, is swapping out phonemes. Since phonemes are the individual sounds in words, to practice swapping phonemes, I might ask a child to change the k in cat to a b sound to make the new word bat. Or I might say, change the g in pig to a t sound to make the new word pit. I know that we just covered a whole lot of information, so let's take a second to review the 5 major phonological awareness skills that we've talked about so far. Rhyming means thinking about the end sounds of words, so words like bat, cat, and sat. Segmenting sentences, like when we count out the car is blue. There's isolating phonemes by noticing sounds in words, like when we say dog starts with the sound d. We talked about segmenting syllables by breaking words into parts, like elephant. And we covered swapping phonemes, like when we change the k in cat to a b to make a new word bat. Now, before we go any further, I want to tackle one more area of confusion for a lot of people. We got a couple of questions about this on Sunday when we did our webinar, so I want to make sure to address it now for all of you. Sometimes there's some confusion about what the difference between phonological awareness and phoneme awareness is. So this is actually the mistake that was in the webinar workbook. So phonological awareness is a big umbrella that covers all of these different parts. So you can see here there are 5 skills. Phoneme awareness is just one piece of phonological awareness. Phoneme means the individual sounds in words. So if you were having phoneme awareness, it means that you would be able to identify the beginning sound in a word, or the ending sound in a word, or even the middle sound in a word. So again, it's just phoneme awareness is just one small piece of the much broader phonological awareness. Let me know if you have any questions about that, though, and I will make sure to follow up at the end. Now, to help give kids a boost on their phonological awareness skills, I'm going to pass along 2 activities that you can use with small groups or as literacy centers. The first freebie is a set of rhyming clip cards. In this example, kids would say the word cat, since it's the big picture at the top of the card, and then they would test whether that word rhymed with the options below it. So they would say, cat, stop. No, that doesn't rhyme. Cat, hat. That rhymes. And the child would clip the hat. I am also going to give you a batch of Elkanon boxes that kids can use to separate the sounds that they hear in words. In this example, students would sound out the word B by touching that first green box on the left, and they would say the sound B. And then they would move their finger to the spot right next to it and say E. So B has two phonemes, B and E. After sounding out both parts, the child would slide her finger along the arrow at the bottom and put the two parts together to say the complete word B. Again, this is a good example of the difference between a phoneme, which is a sound, and the spelling. So obviously we know that the word B has 3 different letters that are used to spell the word B, but it only has 2 sounds. So with these sound boxes, we are only listening to the phonemes. We are not worrying about the actual letters that it takes to spell the word. I'm going to tell you how to get both of the freebies that I just showed you at the very end of the webinar. Next on our agenda is outlining the 5-step plan that I use to differentiate. Being able to teach kids at their just right level is really the key to catapulting their progress because they are getting exactly what they need. The high kids are being stretched and the struggling kiddos are building up their foundation. But how can we meet every student's needs in a class filled with very different reading levels? I'm going to give you a bird's eye view of the 5-step plan that I use, and then we're going to dive more deeply into each one. Step number 1 is assessing kids so that we know exactly what they have already learned and what they need to practice next. Skipping this step is like trying to pull up driving directions to your friend's house without entering your current location. MapQuest would have no idea if you were starting from Cape Town, South Africa, or Vancouver, Canada, or a random spot in between. Similarly, if we don't pinpoint where our students are actually starting, we will have no idea what to teach next. Step number 2 is grouping. In order to meet the needs of every child in class, even when there are very different reading levels, we need to organize students based on the results of those assessments that we completed in step 1. I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step process that I use to create effective reading groups in just a moment. Number 3 on our 5-step plan is launching literacy centers. I have a serious love affair with centers because they have so many perks. They keep kids motivated. The activities are reusable, so after you prep and laminate them one time, you can pull them out and use them again. It's easy to differentiate. For instance, in our sight word center, I can have 2 different groups play the exact same game with a completely different word list so that everyone is practicing at their just right level. And finally, centers teach kids independence because children learn how to stay on task and self-motivated. After launching literacy centers, step number 4 on our list is lucky number 4. It's setting goals for each group. Now, just like assessing our students helped us know where our kids were starting, setting goals helps us figure out where they're going to end up. Let's go back to our direction analogy from just a minute ago. Having both the assessment and the goal setting is like opening up our MapQuest app and entering in the starting location and the destination. The assessment tells us where to start, and the goal setting marks where we're going to end up. Having both pieces of the puzzle helps us figure out all of the steps and turns that we need to take in between. So that is why I plan for the end of the year first. It's called backwards design, and basically it means that you start with your end of year goals and you work backwards so that you can figure out the timeline and the sequence that you need to reach them. Let's break down an example of what backwards design looks like in an actual classroom. We're going to pretend that we are setting goals for a group of kindergartners who are relatively new readers. These brand new kindergartners have strong pre-reading skills, so they can rhyme, they show motivation, they can break words into parts, etc. But they don't know all of their letter sounds, and they are not sounding out words yet. We look up our school district's end-of-year kindergarten standards, and by June, we need those kiddos to memorize all 26 letter sounds. We need them to learn how to read consonant, vowel, consonant words like the word cat and hop. And we need them to memorize 30 high-frequency sight words. So now we can start working backwards to see our timeline and our sequence. To keep our example simple, let's break our school year into 3 trimesters: fall, winter, and spring. Since 30 sight words divided by our 3 trimesters equals 10 sight words each trimester, we can easily see how quickly we need to move through the list. And now we also know that in order to reach our end of year goal, we need our students to memorize their letter sounds by the end of trimester number 1, because then they are going to need to start working on sounding out those 3-letter consonant, vowel, consonant words. Since kids learn to read the beginning and ending consonant letters before they master middle vowel sounds during trimester number 2, they will tackle reading the first and the last letter in the words. And then in trimester number 3, they will add in that middle vowel sound so that they can read all 3 letters at once. I want to pause here and reinforce what I just said in case it caught some of you off guard. When students are learning how to read, we often think, oh, okay, so they see a simple word like the word dog, and they should be able to sound out the D first. And then since they already know what the O sound makes, the next step would be actually sounding out the O, and then they would be sounding out the G. So in our minds, because we've been reading for a long time, that's kind of what naturally comes to mind for us. But in fact, when kids are learning how to read, what the letters that they recognize in a 3-letter word first are the first letter, the D, and the last letter, the G. And then their brains become able to actually add in that middle vowel sound, which is why if you've ever been reading with a child and they come to a word they don't know, let's say the word was dog, instead of reading the word dog, they might say dig or dug, because they're swapping out that middle vowel sound. Their brain hasn't quite made the connection to be able to add in that middle vowel sound as well. So in this backwards design, we knew that children were going to learn the first and last letters in those CVC words first, which is why that's what we focused on in trimester 2. And then we added in that middle vowel sound in trimester 3, so they'd be able to put all of it together. Okay. By working backwards, we were able to see the timeline and sequence for teaching our sight words and our phonics skills. Although we used a scaled down version of the process, by looking at trimesters instead of breaking it down by months, the process is exactly the same. We look at where kids are starting, where they're ending, and then we break down the steps in between. Last but certainly not least is our secret formula for kicking the fear of getting it wrong to the curb. And that is staying flexible. Just like anything in life, we are bound to make some mistakes along the way, but we can always pull out our eraser and try again. If a group cannot seem to stay on task for the life of them, we can move a couple of the kids to a different group and see if that helps their focus. If students need more time to memorize their letter sounds, we can add in another 2 weeks of practice. The more we practice, the easier each step will be and the fewer mistakes that we will make. So we all need to remember to give ourselves some grace and patience. Now let's pause for a moment. If you are following along in the webinar workbook, we're going to tackle the assignment on the bottom of page number 4. If you're taking notes on a blank sheet of paper, I just want you to jot down a number 1, 2, and 3. Now I want you to list 3 things that are not going as well as you'd like during your reading block. Maybe kids are getting distracted during literacy center time, or some of your students are struggling to learn how to read. Maybe you're spending too much time researching lessons, or your prep work is taking forever. Whatever it is, write them down on your list now, and I'm going to give you a minute or so to brainstorm. Now I want you to read through your list and circle just one thing that you would like to focus on over the next few days. If you're comfortable sharing that one thing that you'll be focusing on, pop it into the comment box so that we can see the awesome growth that you have ahead of you. Setting this goal will help you keep your eye on the prize. And as we roll up our sleeves and start digging into assessment and grouping and planning in just a minute, You can always come back to this goal and start listing some solutions that you think might help fix it. This webinar is all about taking your teaching to the next level. So we're going to push ourselves to step up our game by making some tweaks and trying out new strategies. And this is interesting too, as I'm looking at our comments here. I see quite a few of you have a lot more sight words that you are teaching each year, and I applaud you. I know that different districts have a different number of sight words that you have to achieve. The backwards design, what's awesome about it is that you actually can use it with any number of sight words. So let's say that you have to teach 60 sight words by the end of the year, and you are looking at breaking it into 3 parts, just divide it by 3. Or if you're finding that your kids need a little bit more time in that first trimester to really start taking off and mastering those sight words, maybe give yourself a little breathing room and only tackle 10 sight words in the first trimester and split the remaining 50 sight words between trimester 2 and 3. But the goal is the purpose is to see where you're starting, see where you're ending, and give yourself a 30,000-foot big picture view of how you're going to get there. Okay, so we have Julie, getting literacy centers set up. That is an awesome goal, Julie. Sally said, oh goodness, creating reading groups. Mary Jane said attention. That's always a struggle, especially when you're working with those early childhood kiddos, isn't it? We have, let's see, engagement. So I see that. Erica said meaningful activities in different centers that it would not create a distraction for students who we are working with. Yes, Erica. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute too. We're going to talk about some strategies for keeping kids on task and focused, because especially when we're working with young kids, that can really make or break a literacy center. If you have kids just goofing off, obviously that's not helpful for anybody. We want them to stay on task and focused during literacy centers. So thank you for bringing that up, Erica. Jennifer said keeping lessons short to match their attention spans. Yes, and Jennifer, you may have heard this too. I remember when I first started teaching, my mentor teacher said, the kids' attention spans are only as long as their age. So if they're 5, they can pay attention to you for 5 minutes, and then they need to move on to something else or get the wiggles out or something. So especially when we're working with those young kids, their attention spans are so short, we have to keep them engaged and focused. One more, let's look at these. Carol said reading behaviors, so books on head, not staying focused, etc. Yes, Carol. And Carol, for that too, I think that I found that breaking down exactly what we expect of kids, what it looks like to be a really good reader, is a really powerful lesson. So if you'd like me to talk more about that in our question and answer, just pop a note in the box and I'll have Kimberly send that to me at the end. But Carol, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, because you hit the nail on the head. We have to be able to keep kids engaged and focused on their work. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. We are going to go ahead and break down some keys to assessment, really powerful assessment. So now that you've identified a few parts of your reading instruction that you would like to improve, I want us to take a closer look at the individual parts of the 5-step plan so that you can go back and start listing some solutions you think might help with them. As I said earlier, assessment helps us figure out exactly what students have already learned and what they need to practice next. To help break down what we actually need to assess, I'm going to separate our kids into 2 different camps. New readers, those students who are not reading words yet, like many of our 3, 4, and 5-year-old kids. And then other readers, children who have started sounding out words on their own. For our new readers, we need to assess those 4 pre-reading skills that we talked about a little while back. We need to look at their motivation, which means finding out if they're interested in learning how to read. So we are going to look at things like, do they look through books on their own when they have free time? Do they ask about letters that they see around them? We also need to look at print concepts by noticing whether the child is holding a book with the cover facing up. We want to see if they turn the page on the right side when they're finished looking at the pictures, etc. Letter recognition means knowing the names or sounds of letters. So at this stage, kids don't actually need to know every letter name or sound. What we're looking for here is just seeing if they understand the concept that letters make sounds. So they should be able to recognize a few of the letters to demonstrate that they do have the concept down. And finally, when we're assessing new students, we should look at their phonological awareness skills. That term has always tripped me up. I hope I'm not the only one. So as a reminder, phonological awareness starts with the word phone. So that reminds us that it has to do with hearing, just like you hear on the telephone. Phonological awareness means hearing parts of words and moving them around. So when we are assessing kids' phonological awareness skills, we are looking at things like whether they can rhyme, can they break words into syllables, elephant, even whether they can swap out sounds, like when we ask them to change the first sound k in cat to an sound to make a new word, rat. The Elkinen sound boxes that I'm going to be giving you are a great way to build phonological awareness skills because they force kids to break words into parts. In this example, the student is using counting chips to slide a chip into each square as he stretches out the 4 sounds in the word hand. So he says, and he pushes that first chip into the green box. Ah, and he pushes the next chip into the box next to it. N goes to the 3rd box, and then D, he slides a chip into that 4th box. Okay, so we were talking about these Elkinen boxes, and I was sharing with you that you can use Play-Doh with them to help kids work on breaking words into parts. Another fun one, especially if you have boys who are super active or love Matchbox cars, girls too love this, you can take Matchbox cars and you can slide them into each box. You also can use Legos, so you can slide Legos in if you have Lego builders. There are tons of fun ideas. You can even, if you're obsessed with Target erasers like I am, the mini erasers, this is a great activity for that as well. So you'll be getting this at the end of the webinar. So those are the 4 pre-reading skills that we need to assess when we are working with new readers: motivation, print concepts, letter recognition, and phonological awareness. They make up the core foundation that students will need to rely on when they start sounding out words a little later. So we want to make sure that they have all of the skills down pat and are not missing any holes. Now, when we are assessing other readers, we are looking for different things because they have moved beyond pre-reading skills. We need to assess their phonics to see if they actually recognize letter sounds and are able to put them together to read a word. We will look at things like, do they know all of their uppercase and lowercase letter sounds? Have they learned tricky letter combinations like the digraphs sh and th? We even need to find out if they know contractions, like when we take the 2 words can, not, and we squish them together to shorten them and make the word can't. Assessing their phonics lets us see how well students are able to sound out words one part at a time. We also need to assess whole language. In case you're scratching your head and wondering, what is that? I've never heard of whole language before. Don't worry, I've got you. Whole language is just the fancy term for sight words. You might call it your Dolch list or your Fry words. Some people call them snappy words. The possibilities go on, but they all mean the same thing: having students memorize the whole word instead of trying to sound it out phonetically. This is important because there are a lot of common words that kids will see over and over again when they are reading. Words like and, can, or the. And children will save so much time and frustration if they can recognize the word right away without needing to sound it out bit by bit. What's interesting to me about phonics and whole language is that often when you assess kids, and you're assessing both pieces of these puzzles or the puzzle, you'll see that kids fit into one of the 2 camps. They're either phonetic learners or phonetic readers, and they sound out words that they don't know, like the word can. They'll sound it out one bit at a time, k, n, or they're whole language learners, and they're really good at memorizing those sight words. But when they come to a word they don't know, they have the hardest time sounding it out one sound at a time. So I find readers' brains just so interesting. How quickly and accurately students read is called their fluency. If you've ever done a running record, you looked at how many words a child could read per minute, and that is their fluency. The more fluent a reader is, the more natural and ingrained things are in their brains. They don't have to work as hard to read, so they can start working on our last skill, which is reading comprehension. And that just means understanding what is going on in the story. Before we go any further, we need to dispel a common misconception. Many teachers, including me when I first started, think that kids should start working on reading comprehension right away. The thought is that if kids can't track what's happening in stories as they read, there's no purpose in reading. But guess what? We can actually take the pressure off of ourselves, because until students are reading pretty fluently on their own, their brains are not ready to work on reading comprehension too. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to read a paragraph to you in a staccato word-by-word pace, just like a beginning reader would read it. I want you to listen, and I want you to try and keep up with what's happening in the story. The core, eyes, blue. The core is blue. No. The car is blue. The car is blue. Now, if I read several pages and then I came back to you and I said, what color was the car? Your brain would have been working so hard to try and sound out those words, it would be nearly impossible to recall everything that was happening. So, reading word by word makes it incredibly hard to remember and follow along with the story. Until students are reading pretty fluently, it is way too overwhelming to expect them to sound out the words in a story on their own, and at the same time process the content of the story too. So that means that we don't have to assess their reading comprehension until they're a little further in the process. A good rule of thumb is to start assessing reading comprehension when kids are at a middle of first grade reading level, which if you use Fontes and Pinnell is a level E, or if you use the DRA system, it's a level 8. So that wraps up assessing kids to figure out what they already know so that we can determine where they need to go next. Let's go ahead and tackle our next piece of the puzzle, which is planning just right literacy centers. We want our high kids to be working on skills that are at their just right level, and we want our struggling kiddos to practice their just right skills. So how do we meet everyone's needs in a diverse classroom? Literacy centers. Let's talk about what my ideal literacy centers look like. This structure is based on the Daily 5 by Gail Bushey and Joan Mosier. Now, if you guys use the Daily 5 in your classroom, could you just give me a little shout out, because I'm curious how many of you are using it in your classrooms as well. But I've made some tweaks to their system to make a system that works a little bit better for me, and I'm going to tell you about that now. I have a 1-hour literacy center block 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. I set up 6 stations on the first day, and I'll tell you what they are in just a moment. Each group goes to 3 centers a day. So they might go to the first 3 centers on Monday, and then that group would go to the next 3 centers on Tuesday. So that gives me 2 days of activities that I set up just one time, and I don't have to prep again. Groups stay at each center for 15 minutes before they rotate. That gives me 45 minutes of solid literacy work time, with a few minutes beforehand to explain the centers or give a mini lesson about one of the skills that they'll be practicing. Plus, I have a few minutes afterwards for cleanup. So let's look at my 6 stations. Depending on the day, reading might mean reading alone, or it could mean reading with a buddy, or reading around the room, or even reading big books. It depends. I like to mix it up to keep the station fresh for kids, but I always tell students what version they're going to be doing when I introduce the centers on that first day. So I would say, today we're going to be doing read alone, for example. Then I have 2 word workstations. The first one focuses on whole language, and it has kids practice reading and writing their sight words. They're usually playing one of my editable word work or sight word games, and I'm going to be passing on the links for those in just a minute. But it's a really easy way for me to give one group a game that is practicing their just right words, and then give a different group the same exact game using their just right list. Then I have a second word workstation that focuses on phonics. Depending what they need to work on, kids might be practicing letter sounds or 3-letter words or digraphs. There are lots of possibilities here. During work on writing, students might be finishing up a writing activity that we've been working on as a class. They could be writing letters to classmates or creating poems. I also have a listen to reading. This station always makes me laugh because when I first started teaching, this meant listening to books on cassette tape. Hands up if you used to use cassette tapes. Ooh. But since that is so 1990s, kids now listen to stories on the iPad, or they have books on CD. If you're feeling a little retro, you can pull out the CD player. They have headphones, regardless of how they're listening, but so that they don't distract the other children in the room. And then finally, there's Meet the Teacher, when I have the chance to meet with each group of kiddos and really hone in on something that they need to practice. So if group number 1 goes to reading, word work number 1 and word work number 2 on Monday, then they go to work on writing, listen to reading, and meet the teacher on Tuesday. Meanwhile, group number 2 starts with word work number 1. Then they go to word work number 2 and work on writing Monday. And then they start with listen to reading, meet the teacher, and reading on Tuesday. Group number 3 is one more position to the right, starting with word work number 2, and so on. So by the end of the week, by the time the 2 days are through, kids have rotated through all 6 stations, and I've given small group and individualized instruction to every single child in class. And then we repeat the process and start all over. I put out 6 new stations on Wednesday, and the kids rotate through 3 centers that day and 3 centers on Thursday. Karen asked the million-dollar question that we are all curious about. How do you manage your other kindergarten students while teaching your guided reading group without constant reminders to be quietish? This really is the million-dollar question, I think. There are 4 strategies that have helped me. So first, I start small. During the first week of school, we only do read alone so that kids can really master it. We talk about what our bodies look like, what are our hands doing, what are where are our eyes looking, what is our mouth doing? Oh, it's being quiet, okay. Then the next week, I add in 1 more center, and then I add in a 3rd center the following week. By starting really small and breaking down precisely what good choices would look like, and then slowly building up, I'm able to break down exactly what I expect from them, and I found that kids respond appropriately, or pretty successful. And that leads me to our next strategy, which is waiting for meet with the teacher time. I don't actually start meet the teacher until about 1 month into school so that I can roam around the room and help students settle into the routine of the centers before I'm tying myself to my desk. Observing group dynamics can be super helpful here too. If there's a group that just cannot seem to pull it together, I like to stand back and watch. Maybe the activity is too difficult for them, or maybe 2 of the kids just cannot seem to gel. Once I identify the problem, then I can either provide additional teaching support if they need more help, or I can move kids around if the group needs just a little bit of a shift. And finally, using parent volunteers or aides can make a huge difference too. I always have a parent training session at the beginning of the year. I tended to have a really engaged group of parents who were very eager to get in the classroom. So I'd have a parent training session, and I would outline the kinds of feedback and support that I wanted them to give the kids. We would talk about specific things like how to help children find the answer on their own instead of just giving it to them. Or I'd talk to them about how to use positive redirection instead of snapping. But having an extra set of hands is a huge help. Planning literacy centers can be time consuming, so I want to make it a little faster for you with 2 more freebies. This first one is a clickable literacy menu. You just find the center that you're trying to plan, like reading or word work, and you click on one of the activities that fits the skill you want your students to practice. Let me show you how this works. It'll automatically take you to the web page where you can download the activity from Play-Doh to Play-Doh. This one takes you to an editable Penguin board game that allows you to type in your own list of words so that kids are practicing reading and writing the exact sight words that they need to work on. It makes it really easy to differentiate because you can create one set of board games for your high group and another for your medium group. And then this is the second surprise. This is an editable planning chart that you can use to map out your plan for the week. You can edit the names of your centers and groups so that they are a perfect fit for you. If you're giving your group color names, type that into the left-hand column. If you like to give them silly names like the kangaroos, you can type that in. And then go ahead and you can name your centers something fun and whimsical up at the top, whatever name you want to type there. You hit print and you start mapping out when each group will go to each center. Again, I'm going to tell you how to grab all of these freebies at the end of our video, so be sure to stick around. Let's go ahead and move on now to creating effective work groups, because work groups can really make or break the success of our literacy centers. So it's critical that we create effective clusters of students. When I am grouping students, the first thing I do is make a little chart of my students' reading levels like this. Student names are on the left and their reading level is on the right. Then I use that list to sort the kids by level like this. I clump my high group together, my medium high group in a different spot, and so on. Now don't worry, these are not the names that I actually use for my groups. If I were in front of the class and I said, "Hi group, come back to the table for meet the teacher time," it would be a total recipe for disaster and tears. But in the beginning of the process, when I am mapping everything out, labeling it based on their abilities helps me easily see where I need each child to go. So this is really helpful at the beginning of the process. I can always switch the names to something fun like red rockets or blue boomerangs later. So in this example, we have a pretty even spread of levels. There are about 3 to 5 kids in each group. So I would keep students sorted just like this. But if the spread looked more like this, where there's a jumbo-sized clump in that medium-high level, I would split them into 2 groups, because having 8 kids in one group is just way too many to be effective. By splitting one clump of 8 students into 2 groups of 4, we create a more manageable number of students in each group. My general rule of thumb is to keep groups to a maximum of 6 students each, so that I can give children individual coaching when the group meets with me. They fit comfortably around the horseshoe table at that point too, and I can really hone in and monitor their reading. 2 other things to consider when we're grouping kids are pairs are a plus. If a child falls right on the cusp of 2 groups and both groups have an odd number of students, think about moving one of those kids up or down so that the groups are made up of an even number of children. With an even number, kids can easily pair up for partner games or read together time. And secondly, personalities matter. A couple years ago, I had a pair of boys in my 2nd grade class who were super competitive with each other. They would battle it out on the soccer field every recess. They kept tabs on who finished their classwork first and who read the most pages. You get the idea. You guys have probably had a couple of those in your class too. Well, they both belonged in the high group, but I knew that if I put them together, they would spend much more time battling with each other than they would actually working on reading. So I divided the high group into 2 smaller sets. Splitting one group into 2 did mean a little bit more shuffling on my end, but it paid off big time in the long run because everybody was more focused and engaged. So definitely take a closer look at each group to ensure that student dynamics will not cause a disruption. Stephanie asked, how far do you go with differentiation of phonics and spelling? Do you have separate lists or shortened lists? So Stephanie, in the beginning, I only differentiated the sight word activities because that is the piece that felt easiest to me. My school had a sequenced list of Dolch words. So I assessed how many of those words each child in class already knew. And then when I sorted them into groups, each group had a certain list of words that they needed to work on. So that is exactly what I had them practice. My low group might have been working on list number 1, while my high group was doing activities that practiced list number 5. I like to use color coding for my groups because it makes organization pretty easy. So I always had my low group grab their blue bucket, and that's how they knew that their just right sight word games were going to be in that blue bucket. My high group always knew to grab the yellow bucket, so that's how they knew what to grab when they got to their word workstation. As I became really comfortable with the step-by-step sequence of teaching phonics, I was able to differentiate that too. So my low readers could grab their blue bucket of letter name puzzles when they went to the phonics center, and my high readers could grab their yellow bucket, and it might have digraph puzzles in it. So just like anything, I recommend starting small and then building on so that you don't get overwhelmed. Speaking of overwhelmed, that is exactly how I felt when I started teaching 15 years ago. This is my yearbook photo from way back in 2003. The grainy image is a really good metaphor for how I was feeling in this moment. I had taken a handful of literacy classes for my undergrad degree, but I didn't really understand the step-by-step for teaching kids how to read. I was spending countless hours and nearly every weekend planning my reading activities. And my students' progress was nothing to write home about. I didn't have a clear picture of what they knew or what I needed to teach them next. I knew that I needed an easy roadmap for putting everything into place. So over the next decade, I became obsessed with reading. I spent thousands of hours researching best teaching practices and trying them out on my own students. I studied what made my mentor teachers so successful, and I figured out a step-by-step system for teaching kids how to read. Here's the cool part, you guys. My students' progress took off. My high kids soared even higher. My struggling students started to catch up. I even became a reading tutor, and I went on to earn my national board certification. I want you to have the same success. Imagine finally understanding how to skyrocket students' reading progress with an easy-to-follow step-by-step plan. Imagine having crystal clear directions so that you can plan and prep your entire reading instruction in just 1 hour a week. If you are ready to teach reading more effectively with less planning time, if you want to help students not just improve but excel, I am so excited to introduce the Reading Roadmap. This is the training I wish I had 15 years ago, you guys. My 4-week course walks you step by step through the strategies that I know without a doubt will help you become a rock star reading teacher too. We have had hundreds of teachers from all around the world already complete the program, and at the end of every session, I always ask them about their experience. Kathy M. said, "Teaching reading has always seemed like a mystery to me. This was laid out so much more neatly than the reading instruction I received in university. I was finally going to be able to approach teaching reading with confidence and with appropriate resources." And Natalie R., a first grade teacher, said, "The assessment was super meaningful. After using the assessment with my class, I felt as if I was straight away oriented to start reading and language stations based on my students' needs. It's the first time that I felt so confident about the exact needs of my students." When you join, you will receive access to 6 powerful trainings. In Module 1, you'll give your students a major power launch with a 3-part strategy that has them start reading on day 1. You'll learn how to build students' reading confidence, how to easily stretch the time that they read, and teach them exactly what good readers look like so that they are excited to learn how to read. Then we will dive into the reading roadmap. Teaching kids how to read might have felt like you were shooting in the dark before, but I promise it won't anymore. We are going to walk through the exact sequence from start to finish. This reading roadmap will show you where kids begin, where they end up, and all of the steps in between. Being able to teach kids at their just right level is really the key to catapulting their progress because students are getting exactly what they need. The high kids are being stretched and the struggling kiddos are building up their foundation. And assessing kids helps us figure out exactly what their just right level really is. When we find out what students already know, we can pinpoint where they need to go next. So in Module 3, I'm going to give you a printable assessment that shows you what students have learned and what they need to learn next. It takes all of the guesswork out of the process. Once the assessments are finished, it's time to organize students into effective literacy-centered groups and set perfect fit goals for their progress. So in Module 4, I'm going to give you the easy-to-follow plan for sorting kids into groups that work. And I'm going to show you how to map out each group's goals for the entire year. And here's the cool part, you guys. It only takes about 20 minutes to do that. Literacy centers are like chips. Hang with me. Once you start, you get hooked fast. So in Module 5, we're going to jump into Literacy Centers feet first. We will pull back the curtain on the 6 must-have stations you will need to set up, and we'll break down the veteran teacher tips that make rotations run smoothly so that you can be a Literacy Center rock star too. Plus, this is one of my favorite parts, I'm going to pass along more than 240 printable games so that you can save time hunting down activities for teaching letter sounds and sight words and everything in between. Fluency and reading comprehension go together like peas and carrots. So if a child can read a book fluently, he isn't working as hard to sound out the words and can focus his brain power on understanding what is actually happening in the story. So in Module 6, we'll dive into the nuts and bolts of both skills, and I will pass along plenty of helpful activities for you to use in your classroom. When you enroll in the Reading Roadmap, you get lifetime access to a 4-week training program giving you easy-to-follow videos and sanity-saving printables. You get a members-only Facebook group with incredibly dedicated teachers who have the same goals and passions and commitment to education that you do so that you can brainstorm and collaborate and troubleshoot. You get more than 240 printable literacy centers organized by skill, 2 live group coaching calls with me tackling your specific needs so that you can have breakthrough moments and advanced strategies and rubber meets the road problem solving, plus a treasure trove of cheat sheets to save you time and sanity. The program is jam-packed with strategies and printable activities that will skyrocket your reading instruction. So when you complete the course, you also receive a certificate for 15 hours of professional development credit. Maybe you feel overwhelmed about teaching kids how to read and you need an easy step-by-step for putting everything in place. Maybe you worry that some of your students are slipping through the cracks because you just can't figure out how to differentiate your activities for everyone. Or maybe you're tired of watching your kids tune out during reading groups and you need simple ways to make learning fun. You guys, you don't have to pay $1,000 for a graduate level reading course. I am about to hand you a proven, easy to follow system for teaching reading so that you can eliminate your second guessing and become a teaching rock star. And when you join by tomorrow at midnight, you'll also receive 3 action taker bonuses. First, you'll get instant access to a bonus module diving deeper into the 4 signs kids are ready to read. It breaks down the 4 pre-reading skills we talked about today in greater detail so you know the ins and outs of each one, and it gives you printable activities you can use to teach them. Then you'll receive a must-have assessment that makes it crystal clear whether students have mastered those 4 pre-reading skills and tells you exactly what activities to do if they have not. The assessment is so powerful that I've had roadmappers purchase an extended license so that they could use it with their entire school. You'll also receive my 90 days of lesson plans that walk you through exactly what I teach, the mini lessons, the literacy centers, absolutely everything. It takes all of the guesswork out of planning. These 3 powerful bonuses are yours for free when you enroll in the Reading Roadmap by midnight tomorrow. All totaled up, the class includes $1,282 worth of teaching must-haves. And that's not even counting the unannounced surprises and value bombs that I'll be dropping on you once we get started. But because I am super excited to watch you become a rockstar reading teacher over the next 4 weeks, I have set up 2 payment plans for you. You can purchase the entire program for just 4 monthly payments of $97, or you can save even more by making just 1 payment of $297. I know this is an investment, so if you're on the fence or if other trainings have left you stranded and skeptical, I want to give you every opportunity to put the Reading Roadmap into action and finally become the rockstar reading teacher you've been dreaming about. And that is why I'm giving you a full 30 days to hit play on your new teaching system. I am so proud to give you access to the system that I know without a doubt will accelerate your students' reading and help you finally take back your weekends. With a complete course leading you every step of the way and a 30-day guarantee, there really hasn't been a better time to give it an honest shot. Class officially starts next Monday, September 24th. To make it easy for you to sign up, I just sent the enrollment link to your email inbox, so you can hop over to the Reading Roadmap page and click Enroll Now. I cannot wait to take you through the step-by-step of becoming a rockstar reading teacher in just 4 weeks. Now, let's hop over and answer some of your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing this. Hi, guys. Okay, so Kimberly has been gathering some questions for me, so I want to make sure that I hop over here and get them. Thank you again, you guys, for giving me grace today. Okay, so let's see. This first question is from Stacy. I am teaching second grade learning support. We are a mix of students that know and those that don't. Do you think it's different teaching a second grade student with a learning disability versus a kindergartner? Stacy, awesome question. I think it depends. I really do think it depends. It depends on the learning difference. So for some kids, it can be really beneficial to just go back and start with pre-reading skills and really nail down every single step of the process, like focus on pre-reading skills, get those mastered, then start to move into the formal reading process. For other kids, they're going to need additional support, and this is where I think it's really critical that we call upon our resources in the school. So if you have a learning specialist, for example, and you have a student with a specific need, if you can reach out to them and say, this is what I'm doing in the classroom, what ideas do you have for helping this child move along? I think that's beneficial too. I think, often we think we should just know all the answers, and that's just not the case. It depends. Every single child is just different. So it would be on a case-by-case basis, would be my opinion. Okay. Emily said, just curious why you go in alphabetical order versus the most common letters first. I know there are so many ways. I'm just curious what results you're seeing by going in ABC order. Thanks. Emily, great question. So the reason I go in ABC order is because I'm introducing 4 letters a day. So really, I'm able to cover all 26 letters in 2 weeks. And so it doesn't really, if I introduced, let's say I did introduce it based on which letters are most common, it would just take me, I just have to, let me think about this. Sorry, pause for a second. My mind is going a million different different directions. So if I was going with which letters are most common, it would eventually lead to the same result. I am very type A. I like to start with the letter A and go in alphabetical order because in 2 weeks they're going to have been introduced to all of the letters anyway. Does that make sense? I hope. So that's just my system, but you are certainly more than welcome to do it any way you want. I don't want to start a debate on here tonight. Okay, Margaret said, do you do this orally without letters at first when you were talking about phonemic awareness skills? So great question, Margaret. Yes, for phonemic awareness skills, there are some really valuable activities that you can do, and I talk about them in the reading roadmap, but let me just share one example with you. So Margaret's asking, can you introduce these skills without having a physical visual, or having something, working with letters. So let me give you an example of syllable segmenting. This is called beats on the body is the word that I learned. So if we were teaching kids how to break words into parts, you can have them tap it out on their arm. So if we were practicing breaking the word helicopter into syllables, you'd have them start with their hand. They tap helicopter. So they're tapping their hand with the first syllable, their elbow with the second, their shoulder with the third, and then their head with the fourth. If they were doing elephant, it's a shoulder word. So by having them tap their body, a lot of kids are suddenly able to hear the different parts in a word. From this point, you can move on and have them actually use those sound boxes. So that's one good example. I definitely believe, Margaret, that when you're introducing pre-reading skills, you should not be using letters at all, because unless you're working on letter recognition. Obviously, that's one piece that you would definitely need to use letters for. But if you're practicing syllable segmenting, just tap it out. If you're practicing rhyming, you can have kids listen to words and decide if they rhyme. You can play the game Willaby Wallaby Woo, which is a fun morning greeting. You sing Willaby Wallaby Woo, an elephant sat on you, Willaby Wallaby Wee, an elephant sat on me. And then you have the kids take a little elephant picture and they have it above their head, and so they pass it to the neighbor next to them. And the neighbor holds up the little elephant above their head, and then we all sing Willaby Wallaby Want, an elephant sat on Grant, Willaby Wallaby. And then we pass the elephant to the next person. Welly, an elephant sat on Shelly. Willoughby, wallaby, wavery, an elephant sat on Avery, and you keep going around the song, or around the circle. So there are tons of fun rhyming songs that you can sing. That's another example of how you could introduce pre-reading skills without using letters. But hopefully that helps, Margaret. Great question. Okay, Dana asked, does swapping phonemes include digraphs? Yes, Dana. So let's use the word shell as an example. So shell, we know the SH makes just one sound, sh, but it has two letters, S and H. So in the sound boxes, there would be one box, sh, o. So there would be 3 boxes total for the word shell. If you're swapping out that beginning sound, that sh sound, and you're making it a t sound instead, the sh goes away and the t goes in its place. So it's now tell. You would be taking the entire sh away, both letters. Okay, so let's see. Emily said, how would the ear work on the freebie? I'm kind of stumped. Would it be e-er? Yes. So R, anytime you have an R influenced word, it's kind of tricky. So ear is an example of that. We have vowels right next to a letter R. So ear would have e-er. It has 2 different sounds in it. Patty said, do you have a good phonics assessment that you use? Yes, Patty. So actually the phonics assessment that I use is in the reading roadmap. I just give it to you. And I like it because it asks kids it gives kids questions as they move along in the reading process. So for example, it would start by having kids identify letter names, and then it would have them identify letter sounds. And since then the next step in learning how to read is identifying the beginning letter in a word, it would ask questions related to that. And then it would move on and ask kids to name the ending letter in a word. And then it would move on to ask kids to name the middle vowel in the word. So because you're having kids progress through this assessment in the same way that their brain is learning these phonics skills, it's a really easy way to see exactly where children fall in their phonics understanding. And you can just stop the assessment where they're struggling, and you know that's the skill that they need to work on next. And once they've mastered that skill, you can pick up the assessment again and see how far along the process they've moved. So that is why I love the phonics assessment so much. Okay, I have time to take one last question. So this was a question from Erica. She said, do you make your students choose which center they want to go to, or free choice? So Erica, when I first took the Daily 5, one of the things that they are really advocates for is letting kids have free choice, where you say at the beginning of the day, Charlie, it's Monday. Here are your 6 centers you can choose from. You decide where you want to go first. I loved that idea. I loved the concept of it because I love the idea of giving kids a lot of independence and freedom. What I found in my classroom was that because I was letting kids roam freely, it made it harder for me to then differentiate the activities, because if Charlie is over reading by himself and Stacy is in his Just Right group, and she decided she wanted to do the sight word game, Stacy doesn't have a buddy to work with because Charlie's reading on his own. So I decided to take away the free choice and tell kids where they were going to go. And I found that it was just as effective at keeping them engaged. So I know it's a personal choice, and I know some teachers love giving kids the option. I just found that for me, it didn't work as well. So I hope that answers your question. You guys, you have been so gracious. We have definitely gone over our time. Thank you for sticking with me. I want to make sure that you get those freebies that I've been telling you about. So to get them, you're going to click on the link that I sent to your inbox, and you are going to open up the page. You're going to scroll to the very bottom of the Reading Roadmap enrollment page, and at the very bottom, there's a link that says Webinar Freebies on it. Click that link and your freebies will open up. You can just download them and hit print. They are an awesome introduction to all of the awesome printables that we have in store for you with the Reading Roadmap. So I hope you love them. Thank you for joining me tonight. I am excited to help you take your reading confidence to the next level. So I hope to see you on the inside of the Reading Roadmap. And in the meantime, have a fabulous rest of your Wednesday. Bye, guys.